Ultimate Cars from Part 2 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is incredibly strong, so naturally, I want to put him up against all of JJK. Can he solo them? Even without a stand, Cars is one of the most absurdly broken characters in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Usually in these battles, I do verse equalization, like we assume people could fight curses and see cursed energy, things like that, but we're not doing that here. He doesn't need it. In these types of videos, I like to see if the character I'm analyzing also has a hard stop, as in, a character that they simply have no way of defeating. So if we can't find one in this video, he wins. We'll be using a bloodlust to Cars as well. If I did this like my Jujutsu video for example, we'd have two hypothetical versions of Cars. Ultimate Cars the exact same as he is in JoJo, and a version of him from the JJK verse, one where he can interact with curses and has cursed energy by default. But that would be pointless because it would be overpowered. When we get into analyzing his abilities, you'll see why that would be an instant win if he was from this verse. We'll be keeping Cars with the same stats and the same abilities from JoJo. We'll just be dropping him to JJK, as is, with no extra knowledge. So let's go over his physical traits first, starting with strength. We never truly get to see the extent of Cars' power. It's outright stated that his hormone is hundreds of times stronger than Joseph's, so at bare minimum, that's 200, since we're talking multiples of 100 obviously. Plus, his hormone is compared to the power of the sun, and can vaporize flesh on contact. If it literally does have the force of the sun, which it is implied to be literal, that means the amount of force he could produce is over 807 tons of TNT, just from his hormone alone. And that's the bare minimum. When he used this power, he used it pretty casually. He did it to mock Joseph, actually. It wouldn't be crazy to place him at small town level as a baseline, and that's the bare minimum. To highball, he's hundreds of times stronger than post-training Joseph, who could fight the other Pillarmen, who are stronger than Santana, who is above Part 1 Dio, who's arguably stronger than Part 3 Dio in some aspects, who was able to fight Jotaro before he got stronger from Rage, and fully unlock the world. So, let's use Jotaro to scale. This version of Jotaro has feats that place him at small town level also, such as his fight with Justice, and the fact that he stated to have the strongest stand in Part 4, meaning it's above Red Hot Chili Pepper, which can be scaled to being around here as well. So go back to that scaling chain that I just gave you. At the very bottom is Jotaro around small town level. So using that, it's pretty reasonable to say that Cars could wipe out a large city, possibly even beyond that. But if you really want to stretch it even further, his hormone is anywhere from 200 times to 900 times stronger than Joseph's, so it really depends where we place Joseph. With that same scaling chain from before, it's reasonable to say he's around large town level, probably small city level. At the high end at least. And Cars is anywhere from 200 to 900 times that. So if you really want to push him, you could put him at mountain level, possibly even higher. That just goes to show how strong he truly is. Again, we didn't really get to see his full power though, and we're using a vague statement about multipliers, so let's be a little more conservative here with an estimate. I think we could reasonably call him large city level. This feels like a really fair middle ground to me, especially because it puts him on par with some of the top tiers in JJK. Personally, I think he goes even higher, but we're going to be conservative with this part. Now on to durability. Cars can evolve and adapt to pretty much anything, assuming he experiences it and doesn't die instantly. And it's pretty hard to kill him in the first place. Look at what happened when he fell in a volcano. Quickly he tried to adapt, and that didn't work, but he found another adaptation, and found a way to survive in lava for a few minutes. When in space, we see him trying to adapt even further. The issue here was he froze up before he could adapt any further than he already did. He actually did survive out in space, he's just frozen. So he can't move himself, but this didn't kill him. So he could survive these extreme temperatures and adapt to extreme situations like this. His regeneration is also pretty insane. The Pillarmen are even alive as specks of dust apparently. They can regenerate from pieces that are around 1 centimeter cubed. And those are for the other Pillarmen. For Cars, it's pretty likely he can go beyond this. So he could survive being cut up even further, and again, as dust he would still be alive. You'd have to completely destroy every little bit of him if you want him to die. Even if you completely pulverize him, there is a chance he could just regenerate from that. So if you can destroy him completely with one attack, you should be fine. But if you don't accomplish that, he's going to come back regenerated, and he'll probably find a way to adapt to your attacks next. But even without regeneration, his regular body is pretty durable. For example, when he was launched into space, he survived being hit by objects exceeding escape velocity. Escape velocity is Mach 33, aka 33 times the speed of sound. These objects didn't really hurt him, they just propelled him up further. Plus, obviously like I said before, he survived the volcano, including being submerged in lava and surviving the eruption. In case you couldn't tell by this point, we aren't using anything from novel Cars either. This is just Part 2 Cars. At his peak though. Next let's cover his speed. Cars at absolute lowest lowball is beyond the speed of light. He's way beyond it. He generated light at one point and moved so fast that he outsped it. He also dodged the UV ray, which also moves at light speed. And the craziest part is, this is regular Cars doing this, not Ultimate Cars. To go even further, his combat speeds can be pushed way beyond light speed. Vampire Dio from Part 1 is actually comparable to his Part 3 self due to adjusting to his new body in Part 3. In case you didn't know, Part 3 characters are stupidly fast, and this retroactively affects some Part 1 and Part 2 characters to an extent. Kakyoin, for example, can perceive 1/10,000th of a second, and Silver Chariot is noted as one of the fastest stands, with feats of its own pushing it beyond the speed of light. and Star Platinum is above both of them, with the world obviously being comparable. So at low ball, if we assume Dio's Part 3 feats apply to his Part 1 self, that boosts Cars even further. Cars is faster than Part 1 Dio, who's relative to or possibly faster than Dio from Part 3. And while I am using the speed of the stands themselves, it's worth noting that this affects Dio's reaction and combat speeds too because they're perceiving all of this. The stands are controlled by them and they perceive what the stands are doing. And this isn't traversal speed, by the way. This is combat and reaction speed, which is completely different. So Cars at bare minimum is faster than Light, but you could push him even higher. For this video, one thing to remember is that domains have sure hit effects. Cars outspeeds everyone, but in a domain he would still be hit by attacks. I know I said he has no curse energy, but we'll cover that more in a bit. Even if you lowball him and highball JJK, Cars still outspeeds them. Even the top tiers in terms of speed like Sukuna, Gojo, and Kashimo. Other abilities he has includes Hamon, which has multiple uses, the fact he can manipulate his body, he can create life, and the life he creates is actually stronger than normal animals considering the fact that he made a squirrel that cut through metal, as well as an octopus that stopped a plane's propellers. He can possess people, he has enhanced senses, he can copy genetics based on any life form that he knows, so that's not going to apply here. Since we're taking him from JoJo, he won't have the genetic data of anyone from JJK. That would make him instantly overpowered because he could just copy anything by default. As we covered, he has great adaptability. He's immortal and has great regeneration, but that doesn't mean he's completely infallible. And of course, he has an IQ of 400, so he's really smart. Now into the actual battles themselves. By the way, if you're liking this video so far, be sure to drop a like. It shows me you want to see more things like this. Subscribe while you're at it too to see more. We'll only be looking at the top tiers of JJK, and it's not going to be anything in order. It's a relatively short list because we're only going to use people that have any sort of chance to fight him. In raw stats alone, he outclasses a lot of people to begin with, so of course this includes the special grades, as well as people with unique abilities that might counter him, and a few others here and there that aren't necessarily top tiers but maybe could do something. So to start out, since we're taking him as is, he likely will gain some sort of cursed energy immediately. I said he doesn't have it by default, but cursed energy comes from negative emotions, so by putting him in this verse, he might just get that by default. The thing is, he wouldn't have any prior knowledge of it or know how to use it, at least not right away. Again, we usually do verse equalization, but we're not doing that here. This would happen though, this is just the bare minimum and logical. If he were from this verse, he could copy any genetic thing, meaning he could likely copy any cursed technique from a major clan by default due to those being inherited. That's why we took him from JoJo, because otherwise he could just copy everything. This isn't a crazy handicap though, just a slight road bump making it a bit harder for him. He'd first have to get a grip on cursed energy, and this makes him vulnerable to domains. Which is why I mentioned the guaranteed hits of domains before. Let's begin with the disaster curses. You might think Cars wouldn't be able to interact with curses. Like we gave him some cursed energy, but how is he going to actually see and interact with the curses? He's not going to have that by default. Well, he already has pretty enhanced perception, and since we are giving him some level of cursed energy, his enhanced senses would really help him here. Toji, for example, was able to fight curses based on his heightened senses alone, and Cars already has something like that. Better than what Toji has actually. Difference is, Toji had no cursed energy, and Cars does. So either way you slice it, he would be able to see curses, and at least interact with them. With the fact he actually has cursed energy here, he'd probably find a way to exercise them too. It would be a really simple feat, he would just need a little bit of time to get adjusted to it. And that's why I'm including the disaster curses, because they have that slight advantage from the beginning. Hanami and JoJo are terrible matchups though. Cars could do whatever Hanami does, and as far as JoJo, Cars already can adapt to that type of heat. As for Mahito, you might think he can get past Cars' power, but I wouldn't think so. The concept of the soul already exists in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, meaning it's a pre-existing force of nature that Cars might already have knowledge of and control over. As we covered in the Goku vs JJK video, there are ways to counter Mahito. Cars would either need to figure out how to protect his soul with cursed energy, and then use that energy to attack Mahito's soul. He could also wear Mahito down or just one-shot him. Even if he couldn't defend against this, his regen and his own body manipulation would let him survive, even if his soul gets damaged, and he could probably figure out how to repair it later on. So I don't think Mahito would do anything against him. At the worst, he damages Cars a bit, but he learns and grows from it. At best, Cars can instantly figure out a counter to his abilities and walk out unscathed with a very easy fight. Next to Yoruzu. Yeah, a huge jump here. Cars already pretty much exactly does what she does, but better. She has the advantage of creating any substance she knows. Of course, it uses a lot of cursed energy though. Another advantage she has is her domain, with its sure hit effect. Although with Cars' level of knowledge, he might be able to adapt in multiple ways. He could also die here, like if she makes a true sphere in her domain and sends it towards him. But I think Cars would have a few ways to protect himself against this. For one, depending on how quickly he gets a grasp on his cursed energy, he might figure out a way to make a simple domain. Or even better, create other life forms to fight alongside him. Or maybe split himself, something to throw off the domain's targeting. It really depends on the situation, but I feel like he'd figure out a solution for this. So despite the power of her true sphere, Cars has a really easy battle otherwise. As for someone else similar to him, let's go to Maharaga next. Again, he's essentially a better Maharaga, Mahoraga can adapt to any and every phenomena, but Cars can use the powers of any living thing by default. The issue is Cars doesn't have any knowledge of this verse, so it's not like he could just create anything from scratch. Until he learns more about it, he's limited to what he knows from his verse. Since Cars is bloodlusted, he'd probably go for the kill right away. But even if Cars takes his time for some reason, there's no way Mahoraga could adapt to everything, because of all the things Cars could do. There's so many things in his kit that Mahoraga would have to adapt to separately. So Mahoraga would just never fully adapt and would be defeated by something else at some point. Despite how amazing Mahoraga is, I'd say Cars pretty much no diffs here. Next on to Kenjaku. This would be a battle of the minds. Kenjaku's crazy collection of curses can combat Cars, at least to an extent. Nice alliteration there. Kenjaku doesn't necessarily have anything crazy against him, and Cars can overpower most of what he has anyways. If this is the first fight Cars encounters, that could be an issue because he wouldn't know how to exercise the curses right away. But eventually he would adapt. So depending on the setup here, Kenjaku might have some sort of path to victory, but I feel like Cars has this in the bag. It's not like Kenjaku could take over Cars either. Cars' stats are better and he wouldn't get an opening to do that. Plus, Cars can digest people, and possess them too. If Kenjaku tried to take over Cars somehow, Cars would just digest the brain and probably grow from it. It really all depends on the curses Kenjaku uses, but again, I'd say a low diff battle. Next on to Yuki. Her black hole attack is obviously her best bet here, even if it's a suicide move. But would it even kill Cars? Personally, I think it would at least trap him, not permanently. Let's get into some black hole science. Assuming Yuki's black hole works exactly like all the other black holes in the universe, well, first of all, it would obviously destroy Earth. Would it destroy Cars too? It really all depends. So when you enter a black hole's event horizon, you get stretched out completely thin, a process called spaghettification, because it turns you into spaghetti. Yes, that's the real term. No one really knows what happens beyond the event horizon though. But in this area, you get spaghettified, you get torn apart, you get stretched, you encounter extreme heat too. Basically, you get turned into silly putty and get put in an oven, and you get pulled towards the center, aka the singularity. Everything, including light, gets pulled there. So if Cars enters the black hole and reaches the singularity, it's hard to say what would happen. Of course, we could assume that Yuki's black hole doesn't work the exact same way as these black holes, at least not right at the very instant it's made. But for the sake of simplicity, we're assuming it does. He probably could survive the spaghettification process, but the issue is when he encounters the heat, which would happen right away. The event horizon is millions of degrees, and inside the temperature is nearly absolute zero. Again, we're assuming the black hole is around long enough to actually do this, using real ones for comparison, but in the story her black hole didn't actually do any of this. Cars can survive lava, but probably not that type of heat. The temperature of a black hole depends on the size and mass of it, but that event horizon usually is millions of degrees. I don't think Cars would be able to take that kind of heat. And if he somehow survives that heat, he would be frozen in the center, if not completely torn apart with no way to regenerate, because that center is close to absolute zero. Black holes evaporate over time, but over really long periods of time, like billions of years, depending on the density. This is known as Hawking radiation, so at some point, Cars would escape, and then be frozen in space. Personally, I think the black hole would kill him, but not for the reasons you'd expect. The extreme heat would kill him, and if he survives the heat, he'd survive spaghettification. But the center of the black hole would kill him. And even if he somehow survived all of that, he would freeze instantly at the center of the black hole. Sure, Earth would be destroyed in the process, but this would also leave Cars out in space once he's eventually freed, and he'd just be frozen there. His same fate from part 2. So Yuki wouldn't win against Cars, but she might be able to stalemate at least because of this. With a black hole, she would guarantee at least he's sealed, if not killed outright. Otherwise, Cars low diffs. The only thing Yuki does anything here is by sacrificing herself in the process. And again, Cars is bloodlusted, so he could just win this by default. As for fighting Higuruma, I think that Cars would be affected by his domain, but it's kinda random what he'd be on trial for. Plus, his cursed energy being confiscated would just buff him if anything, making him immune to domains. The death sentence is useless if Higuruma isn't fast enough to hit him with his attack. Not to mention, I would think Cars is smart enough to pull his own Saul Goodman. So whatever he is on trial for, he could probably defend himself pretty well against it. This domain probably wouldn't do too much in the long run, and I don't think Higuruma would do too much against him either. Even though at first you might reasonably think he would be able to do something. His domain's pretty OP, but not here. Now on to Gojo. This fight's actually one of the easier ones. In my Gojo vs JoJo Gauntlet video, I sorta glossed over his fight with Cars. In hindsight, I shouldn't have, but I assumed that Gojo could win. Really, I think this fight has multiple outcomes. One path to victory for Gojo is using a domain with purple. This should be possible, and he's used red in a domain before, and nothing's really stopping him from applying the sure hit effect of the domain with purple. His domain actually is useless on Cars besides the sure hit effect. The overload of info probably wouldn't affect him. With the mind and adaptability he has, Cars would be unscathed. As for surviving Unlimited Void, I think if he just stands still doing nothing, yeah, it would stop him. But he's not going to be doing that, he's bloodlusted. This could be an issue because despite Cars' insane intellect, he doesn't have infinite brain power to process everything at once. You could survive those effects, it's just tough to do so. Sukuna took multiple of these domains and survived with brain damage, and JoJo was paralyzed by it, but still survived. Kars also has the speed to avoid the domain in the first place and might just figure out that he could break out of it, or if he could find some way to protect himself against it in another way, that could work too. Why not pull what Andy does in Undead Unluck and just turn off his brain, acting on instinct, or utilize his cursed energy somehow to protect himself, or even just attack Gojo immediately before the effects of the domain fully set in. I would think it wouldn't immediately affect him to its full extent, giving him at least some time to react, then launch towards Gojo and attack him. Also, Kars wouldn't immediately have a way through Infinity, but he might find a way through. Gojo would have to exploit that to his advantage. For those who don't know, Infinity is an automatic filter that Gojo has where he infinitely divides space between him, making it so nothing could reach him, at least when it comes to threats. To get through this with raw power alone, you would need an attack beyond his perception, or an attack with immense speeds that can't be stopped like that. And the former is pretty tough given the fact that he has the 6 eyes. If Gojo uses both of these things to his advantage, he can possibly win. By the way, Hollow Purple is an existence erasure. That's a misconception that I honestly believed at one point too. It's never shown anywhere to be that, and Sukuna survives it twice, which kind of proves this. However, a full power Hollow Purple likely has the destructive power needed to injure Kars, and completely kill him too if it fully engulfs him, with the sure hit effect of course. So that's a way Gojo could win, but could Kars adapt? He definitely could hurt Gojo if he gets through Infinity. His power should be enough. And that's why in that video I said Gojo gets past Kars. Using reasonable estimates for his power, Gojo does have that type of power to do that, but to win he would need to one-shot. As for Kars, with the power of every living thing, depending on how that goes, he might figure out a way to get through Infinity. Who's to say he can't form a microscopic thread? Kars can manipulate himself on a cellular level. In Hidden Inventory, Gojo said he was working on filtering out gases and poisons. It was never confirmed whether or not he could do it, but he probably can by now. But again, these would have to be things he could perceive, and things that he would know as a threat. By mixing different aspects of himself, who's to say what Kars is able to create? The options are limitless, no pun intended. Especially with his extreme intelligence. He could probably find some way to create something that gets through Infinity. If we're assuming Gojo's bloodlusted here too, all Kars would have to do is not get killed by Purple right away. And that's not particularly easy for Gojo, especially because Kars could just attack him in his domain. At some point Gojo would tire out. He doesn't have infinite stamina. Sure, virtually limitless cursed energy, but not stamina. At some point, Gojo would die from old age too, so Kars could just outlive him. But he likely would adapt to Infinity in some way. Infinity isn't infallible, especially with Kars having cursed energy. He could try and utilize domain amplification, or maybe unlock his own cursed technique in domain. Plus, Hamon could be sent through solid objects. If Gojo is standing on something, why not just send Hamon through that surface? Point being, he likely can find some way through Infinity. After experiencing the effects of it, he might find his own way through it that I didn't mention here. After all, he's incredibly smart. Far beyond any real-life person. But let's say he can't get through Infinity this way. Would he just adapt some other way? Yes, he can get through. As he fights, he can learn better ways to apply cursed energy. Domain amplification is an option. Or maybe he'll learn to manipulate energy on Gojo's level. As long as Gojo doesn't try to instantly one-shot in that domain with a Hollow Purple and hand signs and chants, Kars could win, I think. Not to mention, with the level of perception that Kars has, he can likely rival Gojo's 6 eyes. Again, the options of what he could do are limitless here. At some point, I think Kars would adapt. He'd find some way through Infinity. He'd find out how to get past the mechanics of it in whatever way possible. Gojo can only win here if he's able to one-shot him with Hollow Purple, or somehow launch him into space with like a really strong red or something. Kars has way more paths to victory than Gojo. Low diff for him again. As for Sukuna, one way he could win is using his domain to pulverize Kars to nothingness, like cutting him to a molecular level, and then using his Divine Flame to blow up all the remains. But that would be really tough because, first of all, Malevolent Shrine just doesn't cut you up instantly like that. It's over a period of time. Kars would just constantly regenerate to counter this. And even if it did act like that, he might not be able to cut Kars finely enough to make him not regenerate. So all of Sukuna's attacks are pretty much useless, including the World Dismantle. What's the point of cutting someone in half if they could just regenerate from that? Unless he uses some sort of binding vow to help him out here, I think this is another really easy fight for Kars. There's one person I left out, Araume. Kars was originally stopped by being frozen in space. So what about Araume? Well, I don't think it would do much. Freezing Kars didn't kill him, it just stopped him. Araume could temporarily stop him maybe by freezing him. Kars could probably be frozen to the point where he can't act at all. But Araume would have to maintain that temperature, which requires cursed energy, so Araume would get tired out by some point. At best, they would just seal Kars. Only temporarily, without any real way to kill him. And that's assuming Araume's ice is even cold enough to do this. Maybe it won't be cold enough to hold Kars. Maybe he can adapt. So I don't think they're doing anything either. How about everyone together though? Kars could find a way. I would think his adaptation and intelligence would help him. With everyone together, bloodlusted, that gives more avenues for victory. It is Jump Kaisen after all, so maybe this would work. But only a few characters have attacks that could do anything to him, and this would require perfect teamwork. which would be really tough. We're letting the strongest characters fight together, but that doesn't mean they'd instantly work well together, and instantly formulate a plan that would work. Yuki actually has the best chance of stopping him, given the power of her black hole and how hard it is to avoid. Like, Yorizu's attack is pretty crazy too, but Cars would have ways to avoid it outside of a domain, and even in a domain he might find a way. Here's one pretty outrageous way that everyone could stop him at once. Yuki makes a black hole. Maybe not instantly killing him, but at least stealing him. Kenjaku uses anti-gravity to help stop the black hole, or at least maintain it for a bit, while Gojo prepares a hollow purple buffed by everybody around him. Urahime and Gakuganji could help him again, and of course he could use his own chance and hand signs. Kenjaku lets go of the black hole, and if Cars somehow survived all of that, he instantly gets hit by that 200% hollow purple, and is decimated by that. But more likely than not, even with everyone together, Cars could solo the verse. And again, this is without using his highball estimates. With those, it's gonna be even easier. But what do you guys think? Let me know below. Was there anything I should have added? Do you think it'll be tougher for Cars? Maybe easier than that? Comment below. And like usual, I know how power scaling discussions go, so be civil in the comments. We're just having fun, it's not that serious. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.